Have you ever felt that you're not truly living but constantly observing yourself through the eyes of others? It's a subtle sensation. Before you speak, you weigh your words, adjust your emotions, and measure every choice by how it might be received. Outwardly, life continues as usual, but inwardly, a part of you steps back, waiting for the world's reaction before daring to move forward. Carl Jung believed this moment is pivotal in psychological life. When you grow tired not from failure but from always measuring yourself by external standards, it's not a sign of losing direction but a signal to turn back to yourself. This journey isn't about ignoring the world or cutting off from people. It's about shifting from living by the external gaze to focusing on your own inner truth. This topic feels familiar. It's likely not accidental. Perhaps you're ready for a new way of living, one where you no longer need the world's validation to know you're on the right path. Stay with us because what you've been searching for outside may have been waiting for you inside all along. This video guides you through a deep journey, moving from living by the gaze of others to focusing only on yourself. It's about reclaiming your inner anchor and learning to listen to what truly matters to you, even if no one else acknowledges it. There's a familiar stage in life where your worth rises and falls according to others' eyes. A compliment lifts your mood, silence makes you uneasy, and a single unfriendly look can make you doubt your entire path. Outwardly you work, communicate, and fulfill your roles, but inside your inner center slips away. Jung argued that measuring self-worth by the external gaze means losing the deepest anchor of psychological life. Not because others are wrong, but because you've handed over the authority to define yourself to something outside your control. Inner life becomes guided by collective signals, social standards, and reactions, rather than by your own truth. Imagine walking through a forest without a compass. You follow the crowd not because it's the right path, but because you have no other way of knowing the direction. Jung called this living by the collective map. You don't truly know where you're going, you just don't want to be left behind. Alienation begins here, not from doing something wrong, but from living increasingly far from your true self while believing you're being appropriate or up to standard. Choices seem reasonable, but over time you feel empty and exhausted, as if you're living a life that doesn't fully belong to you. Alienation in Jungian psychology isn't about immorality, it's about living far from your true self. You choose fields of study or lifestyles because they're admired, but over time you feel empty and exhausted. This isn't a crisis, but the first whisper of the neglected self. Jung believed each person has an individual rhythm of psychological development. When you live by the external gaze, you force yourself to follow someone else's rhythm, and when it doesn't match your natural process, inner conflict emerges. Fatigue, disorientation, and the feeling of not living your own life are the consequences. Consider a man in his 30s praised as diligent and successful, yet feeling empty and anxious when no one needs him. He stays busy not out of passion but out of fear of emptiness. He constantly compares himself to others, feeling slower and less accomplished. Each comparison is a denial of his unique process, a process that, as Jung emphasized, is never identical to anyone else. When you live by the external gaze, you force yourself to follow someone else's rhythm, leading to inner conflict and exhaustion. Focusing only on yourself from Jung's perspective isn't selfishness or isolation, it's an invitation to return to the inner anchor that's been neglected. It's about stopping the use of the external gaze to define who you are and beginning to ask what truly has meaning for you, even if no one acknowledges it. When you start asking these questions, you prepare to step out of the collective map and find your own compass. Realizing you've lived too long through others' eyes is not a collapse but a gentle call from within. There's a subtle moment when you realize you've lived too long through others' eyes. Jung's answer is often not other people but the persona, the social mask we wear to adapt, be accepted, and avoid exclusion. The persona helps us survive, but problems arise when we forget it's only a role and start believing it's who we truly are. The persona was never meant to carry meaning in life, it's a tool, not the essence. Seeking meaning through the mask creates deep misalignment, drifting you farther from yourself. Fear of being judged turns the persona from a tool into a prison. At first, you want to avoid trouble, conflict, and judgment. You adjust your words, suppress emotions, and choose safe ways of living. Over time, you feel you can't deviate from the role. Every divergent thought creates anxiety. The persona no longer protects you from the world, it protects the world from your true self. When you fully identify with the persona, you live for an image rather than inner truth. Subtle addiction emerges, addiction to recognition. You need praise to feel okay, positive feedback to believe you're right, not because you're selfish but because your sense of worth is placed in the mask, not the self. A friend in a creative environment is always described as pleasant and professional but privately admits she no longer knows what she truly enjoys. Every time she wants to do something different, she worries about others' reaction. She's not living badly but has lost the feeling of living authentically. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean rebellion or abandoning all social roles. Jung didn't encourage blind destruction. Instead, it means beginning to recognize what is persona and what is self. It means daring to see that certain aspects of how you live exist only to be accepted, not because they arise from inner truth. When you begin to loosen the persona, anxiety appears because you're leaving a familiar zone of safety. But Jung believed this anxiety is a sign you're touching truth. You don't need to remove the persona all at once. Jung suggested not destroying all social roles but stopping the mask from governing your inner life. When you focus on yourself, you learn to listen to your inner response before considering others' reactions. Allow yourself not to be recognized in small moments to preserve inner honesty. From this gradual withdrawal of attention from the outer world, a quiet yet profound rebalancing begins. You loosen the persona and stop living entirely to be accepted. An old reflex arises: you compare yourself to others. You observe whether others are moving faster or slower, what they've achieved, and where they are in life. Often you fall into comparison without realizing it. Jung asserted that no two psychological development processes are the same. Each person carries a unique unconscious structure and rhythm of maturation. Society creates shared timelines, but measuring your life by those milestones stops you from listening to your inner process. Comparison isn't just jealousy or insecurity, it's a deeper psychological act. You deny your own individuation process, the path each individual must walk to become themselves. Every time you look at others and conclude you're slower or not enough, you declare your own path invalid simply because it doesn't resemble someone else. This is a subtle form of self-betrayal. Imagine running in a crowded race, speeding up and changing direction just to avoid falling behind, eventually collapsing from exhaustion in a place that isn't your destination. Living within a race expends energy on speed, while what you need most is direction. In Jungian therapy, a man felt behind his friends who had status and stable families while he constantly changed jobs and goals. Each reunion left him feeling like a failure. But during a crisis he realized he'd never been lost, he was simply walking a different path, slower in social terms but deeper in inner terms. When he stopped comparing and focused on what mattered to him, the heaviness lifted, not because he caught up but because he returned to his own rhythm. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become yourself if you're constantly measuring against others' lives. Comparison places you on a timeline that doesn't belong to you, causing you to misjudge necessary phases of your own life, such as slowing down or failing, phases often essential to inner growth. In Greek mythology, Achilles is invincible only when he follows his own destiny. When he seeks to prove himself through others' definitions of glory, he falls at his only vulnerable point. Focusing only on yourself doesn't mean turning your back on the world or isolating yourself. It means stopping the use of other people's lives as the yardstick for your own process. Not arriving by society's standards doesn't mean you're failing. It may mean you're being prepared for a different kind of maturity. Forgetting others in the Jungian sense means forgetting their timelines and returning to the question, am I aligned with myself? When you focus on that question, the race dissolves and your individual path becomes clear and alive. After moving beyond comparison and questioning collective standards, you may realize you're no longer chasing anyone, yet the fear of being judged persists. Jung believed most obsessions with being judged originate not in the external world but in unacknowledged aspects of inner life. Projection is the act of unconsciously attributing inner material to others. When a feeling or self-image is too difficult to accept, the psyche assigns it to someone else. We believe others are judging us, but often it's our own inner shadow. Jung wrote, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The fear of being judged operates through projection. Who is it that doesn't allow you to make mistakes? Who whispers that you're not good enough? Often it's not anyone outside, but a part of you, the shadow, the repressed aspect of the psyche. When the shadow isn't acknowledged, it continues to influence how you interpret the world. Integrating the shadow means seeing and dialoguing with the parts once denied, leading to a crucial shift. Woman constantly worried her colleagues didn't respect her. Every question felt like doubt, every feedback like criticism. But working deeply with herself, she realized she carried a strong belief: I am not good enough. Because she couldn't accept it, she projected it outward, believing others thought it for her. When she confronted her self-doubt, the outside world seemed less judgmental, not because others changed, but because the projection was withdrawn. The world you fear often mirrors what you haven't dared to face within yourself. Modern cognitive psychology shows the brain interprets ambiguous information according to existing beliefs. If you carry a schema of "I am easily judged," you become hypersensitive to looks, tones, or unclear signals, and the brain fills in the gaps with negative interpretations. Jung described this phenomenon long before contemporary research. When you integrate the shadow, external voices lose their power, not because you become indifferent, but because you no longer need others to carry your unresolved inner conflicts. Focusing only on yourself at this level isn't about withdrawing from society or ignoring others. It's about reclaiming psychological energy unconsciously given to the world. Each time you worry about being judged, that energy is projected outward. When you turn back and ask, which part of me is saying this, you bring that energy back inside. Jung saw this as the transition from living in reaction to the world to living in dialogue with oneself. Getting others in this context doesn't mean denying their existence, but stopping the use of them as mirrors for unresolved inner conflicts. When you no longer need the world to carry what you haven't accepted, the world becomes more neutral and less threatening. In that silence, a new kind of freedom emerges. When projection is withdrawn, you stop asking, "Who is judging me?" and begin asking, "What within me wants to be seen?" Staying with that question is a deep step on the path back to yourself. You stop believing all eyes are focused on you, life slows down. The noises recede, and in the settling silence you touch a familiar state: solitude. Jung viewed solitude not as abandonment or failure, but as sacred space where the soul can finally speak. Loneliness doesn't come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate what's important to you. Withdrawing from the crowd isn't escape, but a necessary condition for inner truth to appear. You're constantly reacting to others' opinions and emotions. The self has no space to coordinate life. You may function efficiently and integrate well, but inside remains a quiet space never touched. Fear of that quiet space leads people to cling to busyness and constant interaction. Imagine solitude as a lake in the early morning. When the wind calms, the surface becomes still and the image beneath appears. Psychological life is the same. Deeper layers of yourself emerge when you dare to be alone. Silence doesn't create the true voice, it allows it to be heard. Steve Jobs' journey after leaving Apple is a classic example. Outwardly it looked like failure, but inwardly it was a profound withdrawal. Jobs slowed down, traveled, meditated, and reflected on what truly mattered. During this solitary period, core ideas about design and intuition took shape. When he returned to Apple, he worked from a clearer inner center. Solitude became the space where the self was restructured. What makes people afraid of solitude isn't being alone, but what will surface when there's no one left to distract them. In silence, avoided questions, true desires, unnamed sadness, and inner conflicts begin to demand attention. Jung considered this necessary. Only when you dare to stay with these contents can you integrate them, rather than continuing to project them outward. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean cutting off relationships, but temporarily withdrawing attention to reestablish inner order. You don't need to disappear from society, but you do need periods of silence deep enough so you're no longer pulled by comparison or judgment. When you're alone without trying to fill the time, you give the self the opportunity to coordinate your life again. Forgetting others here doesn't mean being antisocial, it's the only way to return to the center. When you no longer need others to validate you, you stand more firmly in interaction. True solitude allows you to be more fully present when you return to people. You can be in silence without panic. When you can be alone without feeling lack, it's a sign the self has begun to take its place in your life. From that inner foundation you return to the world, not to seek but to live, not to be seen but to be present, not to chase anyone but to walk in alignment with the deepest rhythm of yourself. Solitude doesn't distance you from people, it allows you to be more fully yourself when you return. According to Jung, the profound turning point is when you stop being pulled outward by the world and begin to build a disciplined inner life. Not discipline of force or achievement, but discipline born from inner necessity. Jung distinguished between action driven by the extroverted ego and action rooted in the inner core. When the extroverted ego leads, people act to be seen and recognized. But when action arises from inner necessity, you act because something inside demands to be realized, even if no one sees or praises. True discipline cannot come from a universal formula. It appears when you listen to your own rhythm. Imagine a disciplined inner life as a tree with deep roots. The roots aren't visible or impressive, yet they determine whether the tree can withstand storms. If you only focus on feeding the leaves and shaping the canopy, the tree may appear fine until the first storm arrives. Jungian discipline is about nourishing those invisible roots in silence, not making the canopy more impressive. Leon, a man in finance, was used to a fast pace and goals tied to recognition. After burnout, he slowed down, not by resting completely or launching a dramatic self-improvement plan, but by consistently waking earlier to read, writing reflections, and focusing on the most important task of the day without telling anyone. No one praised him, but he felt calmer and clearer. He didn't become better than others, but more aligned with himself. From that inner anchor, external effectiveness followed as a consequence, not a goal. Modern science shows intrinsic motivation is more sustainable than extrinsic motivation. When action is driven by rewards or evaluation, the brain becomes fatigued and needs higher stimulation. By contrast, when action is tied to personal meaning and inner coherence, the nervous system maintains a stable state of focus. Jung described this as psychic energy flowing long-term only when it serves the process of becoming oneself. Focusing only on yourself at this stage isn't turning away from the world but establishing a new order of priorities. You invest in yourself not to surpass others but to avoid betraying what you know to be true for you. You may do less or move slower than others, but each step carries weight. This discipline is often lonely because it doesn't produce immediate achievements or applause, but it remains undisturbed. True growth is almost always silent, a quiet accumulation. Each day you choose to do what is necessary without being pushed. Each time you keep your word to yourself in small matters, you strengthen your inner center. When that center becomes solid, you act in the world without being dragged by it. When inner life is disciplined, you no longer need excessive external control. You don't have to force yourself to try harder, the energy is already there. You don't need to prove because the direction is clear. The more deeply you focus on yourself, the more steadily you are present in life. Quiet, unshowy, but with weight. This is the discipline no one sees, yet it supports your entire life. If these lines touch you in a calm way enough to make you pause and look more deeply at your own rhythm of living, recognize that even such a silent gesture is a form of inner discipline. Sometimes the smallest choices mark the beginning of real change. What happens when you've built a disciplined inner life yet still feel as though you're waiting for the world to respond? When you're no longer chaotic or chasing comparison but still wish to be acknowledged? Jung said this isn't a failure but the next stage of ego maturation, the moment when energy truly begins to withdraw from the world. When the ego is immature, it needs reflection to know it exists. Praise and attention serve as mirrors, but as the ego matures, it no longer needs the world to constantly tell it's okay. This point value no longer comes from how much you have or how many people recognize you, but from a deep inner sense that what you live, think, and do are not in conflict. Many confuse focus on yourself with egoism or withdrawal, but withdrawing energy from the world isn't turning away from others. It's stopping the use of them as a source of your sense of worth. When you still need validation, a portion of your psychic energy flows outward, waiting to be returned as praise or attention. Anna moved beyond comparison and judgment with a solid inner life. Yet whenever she shared a project, she unconsciously checked for feedback. Not because she was weak, but because a part of her still asked, "Is this good enough to be seen?" When she noticed this and stopped, not by forcing indifference but by returning to the inner feeling, a quiet shift occurred. She no longer rose or fell with others' reactions. The work remained the same, but her emotions were lighter. She lost dependence, not motivation. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. To fully accept yourself means you no longer need anyone else to bear witness to your value. This is frightening for an immature ego, but for an ego that has passed through experience, it becomes liberation. You no longer need to prove because there's no part inside demanding reassurance. Psychic energy is like a stream. When you seek validation, it flows outward. When you withdraw it, it nourishes the roots, unseen but vital." Emotional independence in Jungian psychology doesn't mean needing no one, but not being shaken by whether others respond. When the self coordinates life, your emotions no longer rise and fall with external gazes. You can receive praise without excessive excitement and criticism without collapse, not because you're numb, but because the center of regulation has shifted from outside to inside. Focusing only on yourself becomes a natural state, not an effort. We're not concerned with proving you're right, nor do you need anyone to confirm your path. Not intellectually, but through a deep sense of inner coherence. This is a particular moment of psychological maturity, no longer living to be seen or recognized, but not betraying what you know to be true. The world and people remain, but they no longer hold authority over your inner life. In this quiet withdrawal, a rare form of freedom appears. Life doesn't necessarily become easier, but it becomes truer. You no longer have to live fast to keep up, live correctly to be accepted, or live big to be seen. You only need to live in alignment with what moves most deeply within you. Paradoxically, when you stop seeking your place in the world no longer has the power to shake you. This is the essence of focusing only on yourself, a quiet return, a silent shift of the center from outside to inside. No longer needing the world to confirm who you are, nor needing others' gazes as proof of your value, you begin to stand on a different foundation, inner coherence. From this point, you don't have to live fast, correctly, or big. You only need to live in alignment with what's moving most deeply within you. When you stop seeking your place in the world loses its power to shake you. Share this journey with someone tired of living under others' gazes. If you want to continue the journey into inner life, remember, it's not about becoming a better version for the world, but about no longer losing yourself within it. The journey from living by the external gaze to focusing only on yourself is a quiet, profound shift. It's about reclaiming your inner anchor, integrating your shadow, and building a disciplined inner life. When you stand firmly within yourself, you return to the world not to seek validation, but to live authentically. This is the true freedom Jung envisioned, a life lived from the inside out.